Cyberpunk 2077 has truly had a journey of turmoil and redemption in the past several years. With the recent release of Update 2.0 and the Phantom Liberty expansion, Cyberpunk has truly had a lot of attention recently. But no matter the changes to the game itself, one thing has always stayed the same throughout its lifespan. That is Night City. I believe that Night City is a setting which generates so many questions in my mind. It is a confusing entity, a place which cannot be defined. It shows us the extravagance of the future, whilst at the same time makes it monotonous, taking us to a point where we become disconnected and isolated. Night City is an ever-advancing force, leaving behind the people who made it. This is presented most prevalently through the character of Johnny Silverhand, a veteran of the Central American Wars who vowed to end the corporation's madness, becoming a known, yet fading legend in the year 2077. But what do I mean by the stoic face of Night City? What am I trying to explore in this dive into Cyberpunk's world? Well, I believe that Night City has become so advanced and so immovable, its high-rise towers and adverts projected into the night sky almost present it as a godlike entity, omnipresent and seemingly all-knowing. The people who inhabit Night City may fight and squabble, but the city will keep growing no matter what, keep building further and further into the heavens, while leaving those on the street level below to wallow in the mud. This can be seen through Johnny Silverhand, who may be involved in destroying Arasaka Tower, but we see, in 2077, another tower, more colossal and brooding, takes its place, an immovable mass of steel, glass and neon, ever engulfing the world. On the point of Arasaka Tower, when V and Jackie enter Yorinobu's penthouse in Konpeki Plaza, viewing his squabble and betrayal of Saburo, it is almost akin to Greek gods in Mount Olympus, with the thunder and rain raging outside. The rest of the world outside the windows falls away, isolating us in this one moment. And this setting is fit for their actions, as these are the people who essentially control the world, those with limitless power, ever seeking more ways to prolong their dynasties. We witness these corporate gods in a moment of fundamental change for Night City, and all we can do as the player is watch, powerless to stop the events from unfolding. We can only be voyeurs whilst the power dynamic changes forever. Ironically, when we steal the chip containing the consciousness of Johnny Silverhand, it is almost like a trivial trophy for the Arasaka family, the ultimate dishonour, not allowing Silverhand to die. Instead, forcing him into an eternal containment. Johnny is not a god like the Arasakas, he is a mortal, trying to destroy the neon-soaked heavens of the corporations, only to fall short and be sent tumbling back down, fading out of reality, and out of memory. In my constant revisits to Cyberpunk 2077 to explore Night City and observe its design, I always find myself lost in exploration, allowing myself to drown in the neon hellscape. I noticed that the design of Night City always draws the player to look upwards, drawing your attention to the advertisements and the colossal towers of steel and glass, almost like a hypnosis. There is something quite voyeuristic about this approach to Night City's visual representation, as we are somewhat restricted in our exploration. We cannot pilot the various vehicles that cascade across the sky, nor can we explore the interior of every building we see. We are simply anchored to street level. While this may be a technical limitation of the game, I choose to see these as purposeful secrets of Night City, constantly taunting the player's imagination. We cannot enter Arasaka Tower, nor can we explore the apartment complexes in which we buy our homes. Our gaze is limited. Like there is something so ethereal, something so beyond our perception, that we simply cannot be allowed to see it. And this is definitely hinted to within our run-ins with the Black Wall, and Alt Cunningham, who has become a kind of being of higher consciousness, fully enveloped into the Black Wall. They both represent something beyond our plane of existence. On this point of what we are allowed to see, and the point of ordinary people on street level, it seems like their view, their world, is prohibited to endless urban sprawl, whilst that of the corporate gods, Arasaka and Militech, the ones in power, live amongst the unseen, the untouchable. The exterior Night City is a distraction to those who walk its streets, whilst the select few are behind the two-way mirror of the cityscape, adding to their godlike status, all-seeing yet unseen. This can be seen most clearly in the fact that there is no rhyme or reason to Night City's cityscape. Colossal structures across the urban space spread like a technological disease. They're not like typical skyscrapers. Their shapes and the space they occupy are imposing, brutal, and oppressive to the citizens of Night City. Some examples can be seen throughout Night City, such as V's apartment complex, a small society contained within a multi-story block, a dark, damp hole lacking sunlight where people rot under the spell of BDs, drug abuse and crime. A stark example of the NUSA's societal collapse and subjugation at the hands of corporations. This is no more apparent than in Cyberpunk's recent and fantastic DLC Phantom Liberty, where V ventures to the military-controlled Dogtown. Visually, Dogtown isn't a continuation of Night City's design. It is separate. Its decaying buildings and overgrown infrastructure provide such a stark contrast to Night City. It is a blending of decay and society, almost as if it's a reflection of Night City, one which has allowed itself to wallow in the mud with the mortals, a world which rejects everything Night City represents. And on this point of rejection, we can see how the dynamic of these two societies affects Night City too. The long queue of migrants swarm the checkpoints from Night City into Dogtown, looking to escape the city. In other words, it can be argued that they would rather choose a militaristic dictator, Kurt Hansen, to rule them instead of the corporations, peering at them from over the walls. Night City's disease of progression, of advancing beyond limits, affects Dogtown too. Corporate giants meet at the Black Sapphire Hotel to cash in on Dogtown's resources. The city yearns for another corpse to devour, another space to be occupied by monoliths of extreme capitalism. But how does this all relate to the idea of the stoic face of the city, the fading legend of Johnny Silverhand, his legend versus our reality? When we look at the design, the architecture of Night City, there is nothing to indicate that Johnny Silverhand ever existed. While the music of Samurai is sold and remembered fondly, Johnny Silverhand is almost always referred to as the Rocker Boy, stripped of death and of name. The most telling example of this would be the memorial to the victims of the 2023 Arasaka Tower bombing, located next to the new tower in Memorial Park. It is an easily missed location in Night City, and with reason. It is lost in the noise and bustle of the city. When I first came across this place, at first I didn't realise it was a memorial. It appears as an extension of the minimalist Arasaka design around Night City. Interestingly, its design and colours don't really distinguish itself from the rest of Night City, and the symbolism is important too, as the stone plinths are very much like a smaller version of the rebuilt Arasaka Tower. It is almost like a corporation's memorial to its once destroyed shining pillar of power, as it lacks a public identity, no names of those killed, no voice from the people. Much like Johnny himself, it is buried under the hypnotic masquerade of Night City. Speaking of Johnny being buried under the immense entity of Night City, it is also important to discuss the character of Kerry Eurodyne, a member of Samurai who didn't follow Johnny into the fire, who did not put the band's preachings into action, but instead played into Night City's game, using Samurai and Johnny as a way to gain riches and cement himself in the zeitgeist of Night City, plastered on posters and adverts. Kerry is an interesting character, as he is not exactly the opposite to Johnny, as he does make songs about corporate madness and those crushed under them, but instead I would argue that he is a non-radical reflection of Johnny, one which has chosen a different path, to give himself into Night City's allure, rather than join the insurgents in their futile attempt to end the corporation's madness. In the grand scheme of this video, I believe that these two characters perfectly embody the idea of legend versus reality. The price that Johnny pays to become a self-imposed legend is steep, even as we see his legacy fade, whilst Kerry presents the reality counterpart, a representation of the easy choice, a choice that much of the citizens of Night City would make. He does not fight, he lays down comfortably, basking in Night City's gluttony. Johnny and Kerry present a clear dichotomy between the two existences in Night City, that of existing in this city's shadow, and the alternative, being absorbed and forgotten into its expanse, much like Old Cunningham. An interesting observation of legend versus reality in Cyberpunk is the 3 story paths we can choose at the beginning of the game. Each path, while unique in their beginning, all end the same way. We are someone trying to make a name for ourselves in Night City with the help of Jackie. We really see this in effect through the montage of our first steps into Night City, scoring gigs and partying, again, basking in the allure of the city. However, it is all in vain. Our act to defy Night City, to steal the chip of Johnny, to go against our corporate gods, always ends the same way. Jackie dies, in the back of a taxi, a death which isn't monumentous or glamorous, no blaze of glory. It is a sad and harsh reality that V has to face. I think it is really important to understand this concept of Night City as a funnel for those looking to create a name for themselves. No matter where a person comes from, no matter what lives they have lived, Night City remains stoic. Night City is a machine, constantly churning and producing, a dark and brooding embodiment of capitalism gone mad. One story path which always sticks out to me is that of the nomad. Starting your story as someone living in a small town, venturing into Night City through a shady deal. A key moment which stayed with me throughout this is the iguana we steal from Arasaka. This animal is important, as it is something which represents a form so natural, so unequivocally related to the natural world, a pure life form. Interestingly, we see how much death and destruction is caused from this real animal, even though in Night City we see evidence of synthetic animals in people's lives, leaving us to question whether it is actually real, or a replica, a carbon copy of the real thing. However, within Night City, the question has to be asked, what is real? We are surrounded by hollow projections of trees, and brain dances which give us momentary escape from our polluted vision within Night City. Again, when V and Jackie enter the penthouse of Konpeki Plaza, we see another iguana, a display, a trophy symbolising one's faltering connection to the natural world, one of purity to boast wealth and status, and I think this image fundamentally links to my idea of legend versus reality, as the natural world seems to slip further and further away from the world presented in 2077. With each step Night City takes in its progression, the world in which it exists becomes smaller and smaller, and our perceptions become less and less connected and based through the world around us. Instead, our view of nature, our view of the world, is strictly funneled and warped through Night City, until nature becomes that of legend, a distant and idealistic memory of world past. This is also presented visually as the only signs left of nature are broken down to its most basic elements: earth, water, fire, and air. Much like the iguana, it seems like the elemental forces within nature have become trivialized, a lesser version of a whole. The parts are there, however, they do not exist to create a whole. They are forever shattered, separated, never to be reunited. In my first playthrough of Cyberpunk, I chose the Arasaka ending, albeit unknowingly. I think this particular ending to the game, allowing yourself to be taken by Arasaka to have the chip removed and ultimately rid yourself of Johnny, is a somber feeling. However, it is probably the most brutally realistic depiction of our most likely ending, if we existed in V's shoes. I think the moments which always stick out to me in this sequence are when Johnny's haunting presence torments V for the final time, mocking V. It's when we finally realise how little Johnny values V, only viewing us as a way to allow his presence in the world again. Conversely, the final moment of the Arasaka ending, when V looks out of the space station at the decaying Earth, we hold up Jackie's necklace whilst the cover of Never Fade Away plays in the background, a moment in gaming which has always stayed with me. I think this moment is hugely important, as not only the song signifies our shift away from Johnny, no longer being sung by samurai, but it also signifies our return to Night City's shadow. It is interesting to observe that once we choose the ending which aligns with the corporations, it is the most peaceful ending and bittersweet ending. Like Kerry, we choose to no longer fight against the system. Instead, we allow ourselves to be engrossed in it, albeit for better or for worse. Out of every ending Cyberpunk 2077 presents, I think the most fascinating one is our choice to leave Night City with Panam. Panam's status in Night Cities and also in V's story presents something similar to Kerry. However, while we do not choose to simply give up fighting, we do fight, but in carefully chosen intervals, unlike Johnny. Following Panam through her missions in the desert outside the city offer us much needed moments of respite, and while some moments are indeed violent, they are still separated, isolated from the noise of the city. They are places and missions in which we embark on that lie just out of the city's reach. Places which are open, spacious, and remind us that there are parts of the world which are not yet corrupted. Like Kerry, Panam and her choices also present a distinct contrast from Johnny. Panam's fight for freedom is similar to Johnny in a lot of respects, however she chooses a very inward choice to fight, choosing her and her own personal freedom, rather than the outward explosion of violence that Johnny chooses. And this becomes no more apparent than our conversations with Panam throughout the game, updating her on V's well-being and the events we have been through. V's voice always becomes softer, more compassionate when talking with Panam, symbolising once again her status as a cure to the noise of Night City. But how does this all relate to the stoic face of Night City, the idea of legend versus reality? Well, I choose to view Panam's ending as the reality of freedom in Cyberpunk's world. Like Johnny symbolises, our fight against Night City and the corporations is hopeless. We will never truly win this war. Choosing a personal freedom, removing ourselves from the rigged game that is Night City, we become truly free. And, speaking of endings, the final sequence in Panam's ending truly captures this piece, as we sit atop our stolen Militech Basilisk, gliding across the star-laden water, far, far away from the glow of Night City, far away from the stoic nightmare.
A thing of beauty, I know, will never fade away. What you did to me, I know. Said what you had to say, but